And I'm really excited that you have all decided to choose this featured session because I am personally very excited about this session. My name is Heather Strickland. I am the Communications Director for the North Carolina Partnership for Children. I also have the incredible honor of being the lead coordinator for this conference. So you are at Engaging the Next Generation in Early Childhood. And I have the honor of introducing your moderator for this morning, Nation Hahn. As Director of Engagement at New Kind, Nation focuses on building community engagement across a variety of platforms, ranging from digital media to community gardens. As part of New Kind, he has served as a senior online strategist for the Coalition to Protect All NC Families campaign. He led the online fundraising program, which set a North Carolina record for money raised online. He also served as the lead of the Research Triangle Park's Reimagine North Carolina effort, which was a 2-week, 23-stop bus tour of the state as part of their planning for their future redevelopment. Prior to New Kind, Nation worked with the Wake County Democratic Party, the United Football League, NC Sierra Club, and John Edwards for president. Nation is the board president of the Jamie Kerr Hahn Foundation. He is also on the board of the Interfaith Food Shuttle, the NC Community Development Initiative, and the Hope Center at Pullen, and the Pamlico Tar River Foundation. That is a very, very impressive bio, but it is not the only ways in which Nation is changing the world. Nation is changing the world with campaigns like Choose Optimism, with sharing messages of hope like the following. To put one foot in front of the other is hard work. When facing grief, it might be the hardest work that you ever have to do in your entire life, but it is also the most important work. You honor the person or people that you have lost by the way you live, by the way you love, and by fighting for hope. Nation is truly changing the world with an overwhelming amount of positivity, hope, and care for others, and it is my honor to introduce him as the moderator for this very important session. Nation?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I wish my mother was here to hear that biography. That would have been a really great Mother's Day gift for her. I'm not sure that she would believe all of it. But, well, I'm joined by Stacey, Randall, and Abby Compton, who have become friends over the course of the development of this workshop, although I've known Abby for a lot longer. Like a true millennial, I'm going to read to you from their biography from my iPhone. Stacey is a human capital expert and workforce researcher who previously held the roles of Chief Talent Officer, Workforce Futurist, and Workforce Development Director at for-profit and nonprofit organizations. She brings unique insights to XYZ University audiences as a young professional with a strong background in talent development, in addition to being a college professor and founder of a young professionals organization. As an adjunct professor at Queen's University, Stacey interacts with the next generation on a regular basis. Her list of accomplishments includes being a certified employee retention specialist and productivity coach, and the founder of the Charlotte Young Professionals Organization and Women in Business Mentoring Program. Stacey has been published and featured in several national publications, including Workforce Management, Chief Learning Officer, Recruiting Trends, Business Finance, and more. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you.
Abby works as an advocate and community organizer to support Share Our Strength's No Kid Hungry campaign, a national campaign to end child hunger in the United States. Working with corporate stakeholders, not-for-profit orgs, and state government, Abby builds coalitions for programmatic change and works to generate political will to connect more kids with the nutritious meals they need to live, learn, and play. Prior to joining Share Our Strength, Abby worked in state government on Capitol Hill as well as for other advocacy causes. She was fortunate to attend UNC Chapel Hill, where we're both Tar Heels, to receive her bachelor's degree and holds master's degrees in government and business administration from Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Abby.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, opening question actually goes to you. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear millennial generation? Anyone? I know a few of you, and I'll call on you. Techies. Flip-flops. Any other thoughts? Tracy Zimmerman, what do you think of when you think of millennials?
You've got a hand right there.
Well, that's not a very optimistic view. Yes. Selfies. Thank you. Good. Good to hear some positivity. Others?
Why do I have no grandkids if they're not getting married?
I want it and I want it now.
The future. Thank you. Collaboration. Flexibility.
Impatient. They want it
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yes.
Waiting for information to come to them.
Interesting. Yes.
Entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs. Oh, great. Well, we are going to do a little exercise now to introduce you to 3 millennials, or at least 3 millennial personas. First, Abby.
Yes. So I am the persona of Ashley. I am the oldest of the millennials. I am 31 years old, born in 1984, and graduated with my associate's degree in 2003. I'm finally married with a mortgage and hoping to have kids within the next year. While I have voted in elections before, I don't think that our generation can positively influence political advocacy. I believe my greatest impact lies in social awareness and grassroots causes. As the oldest of my generation, I know we will be 75% of the global workforce by 2025. Think about what 75% means for your organization. Making a living is more than just doing work that matters. It is about the paycheck too. Remember that mortgage that I mentioned.
I'm Michael. I'm the dreaded middle child. I was born in 1988, graduated college in 2009, and I'm 27 years old. I'm actually 29. I'm on my 3rd job. The average tenure for a job in my generation graduating into this difficult economy is 2 years. My primary needs right now are stability and financial security. But high school seniors today, and the people from my generation just a few years prior, are more likely than previous generations to state that making a contribution to society is very important to us. And also, we're more likely to say that we want to lead within our communities than previous generations. And over 50% of us wish to engage beyond donating. Don't judge me for participation trophies. 86% of myself and my peers believe that hard work is important. I'm more likely to be a city dweller, even if it requires me to live at home for a few years to save money to move downtown. And you may not know, a top concern for me is actually retirement savings.
I'm Jessica. I am the youngest of the millennials. I'm 23 years old. I was born in 1992, and I just recently graduated college in 2013. My student loan debt is $33,000. But you can count me one of the lucky ones, because the average debt load of my friends in this generation is $45,000. Think about that for a minute, right? With Ashley, the older sibling of our personas, when she graduated college, the percentage of debt, of student loan debt to household debt, was only 3.1%. Now, just at the end of 2014, the percentage of student loan debt to overall household income debt is almost 10%, coming in at 9.8%. There is one way I am different from my older siblings of the millennials, is that I've never had a credit card. In 2009, there was a law that was passed that said that credit card companies could not entice me to sign up for a free credit card with a t-shirt or a koozie that littered the college campuses that you guys may remember. And there is something else that's important for you to understand. I don't understand why it's such a big deal, but it seems to be to people older than me. I can't read or write in cursive. Doesn't seem to be a big deal to me. I just wasn't taught how to do it. But there's one thing that really excites me. I recently read a survey that one of the most sought after skills by the C-suite is talent that knows how to work collaboratively. And that really excites me, because a majority of my schoolwork has focused around working in teams and group work. So I'm really excited to add what I can from a collaborative perspective.
Excellent. Well, now Stacey is going to move into an overview of why exactly we are having this conversation in the first place.
So what did you guys think of those personas? Other than we know they can't read and write in cursive. We just have to accept that. Okay. Anything surprise you? Nope. The saving for retirement is actually something they are very concerned about. Yes. Anything else?
These are reminded that their life experiences are different among them. They don't have one life experience.
Absolutely. Right. Definitely. And so I'll talk a little bit about why this matters from a generational perspective. But the first thing I want to talk about is kind of why we are here today having this conversation and why it's so relevant for your organizations. If I were standing in front of you 10 years ago, and yes, that would have meant that I was 12. Let's just go with that, okay? If I were standing in front of you 10 years ago, I would have told you a perfect storm is coming. Today, I tell you, we're in it. We're in that perfect storm. And there has been more change than we have ever seen in our history. And through that change, we're finding that there are 3 key reasons why we're dealing with all this change. And so the first key reason is this. We're living in a new normal of a very fragile economy. We are on the other side, thank goodness, of the worst recession we had seen in decades and decades. But this new normal is our fragile economy. And the recovery has been slow, which only adds stress to our economy. And we haven't seen any real stability since the dot-com bust. Right? So if you think about what that looks like, right, our economy is a driver of a lot of change and part of this perfect storm happening. The second reason that we're in this perfect storm is advancing technologies. Think about this for a minute. There has been more technology invented in the last 5 years than there has been collectively in the last 50 years. And it changes, and it's more rapid than ever before. And when you think about technology, that explosion that we're now dealing with, right, it changes everything. It changes how we work, how we live, how we do business, what our expectations are, and how we communicate. So the technology explosion is another reason why we're in this perfect storm. And the third reason is, and probably the most threatening, is our demographic shift. If you think about it, the baby boomer generation has been the largest generation that we can remember up until recently, coming in at 78 million strong. And every single sector or industry is largely managed, with the exception of technology, is largely managed and supported by the baby boomer generation. They moved into positions of power, and they largely stayed there. But there's a shift happening, and it looks a little bit like this. And this is our millennial generation. They are in their early 20s to about 34. The actual oldest millennial will turn 35 this year. And they are on their way to taking over the workforce because they are currently our largest generation, coming in 2 million more than our boomers at 80 million strong. So when you think about what that looks like for the workforce, here's some statistics from the Labor Bureau. Think back to just 5 years ago in 2010, right? Our baby boomers still made up a majority of our workforce, but this is the year that switches, that it flips. And if you look at the numbers in red, we've got Gen Y, which is another term for millennials, right? We've got Gen Y at almost 40% of the workforce. And the baby boomers have shrunk, right, to 30%. And that trend is only going to continue as we get to 50% and move our way into 75% of the workforce. And what's really interesting about this is that notice the group in the middle, Gen X, right? It's the generation I talk about can't get no respect. Seriously. We get 14 years. Every other generation gets about 20. But if you look at that, they've been at 22%, and it never changes. We don't birth a 44-year-old today, right? I mean, so we can't add any more Gen Xers to what we're looking at for our workforce. So you've got this one generation in the middle that's just kind of sandwiched, right? That's just kind of moving along, and eventually it'll start to drop off as our older Xers get ready to retire. But in reality, what we're really seeing the biggest retirement come from, as to be expected due to age, is our boomers and our millennials, or Gen Y, taking over the majority of the workforce. It's really important to think about what does that mean for the people who are going to engage and support your organizations in the future, and what do they look like? So I'm going to briefly just go over 3 key things I want you to keep in mind for today's conversation, and of course take with you going forward. And so here's 3 ways that the millennial generation is probably a little bit different than you. First one is access versus ownership. Think about it. We define ourselves based on our possessions. It may not be pretty, but we do it, right? And we've had decades and decades of defining ourselves by the possessions that we own. The millennial generation looks at it differently. They want access. Why access? Because access provides different experiences and different opportunities that ownership won't give you, because you're stuck paying for it, right? It's why we've seen such a major increase in bike sharing, right, and car sharing. If I live in a city and I do everything within that city radius and I'm 24 years old, I don't need a car. I can rent a car, of course, right? But more likely I'm going to get it through a car sharing service when I want to drive 3 hours out to visit my parents for the weekend, right? I don't need to be saddled with that car payment. I just need access to it when I need it to create the experiences I want to create. The second one is relationships versus loyalty. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but May 1st, so just last Friday, was actually Loyalty Day, right? And we focus on what that looks like from a baby boomer perspective. That's how we define it, right? Loyalty is commitment to an institution over a long period of time. Well, they don't commit to institutions. The millennial generation commits to relationships. They're much more likely to commit to a person than they are to an actual institution. And it's important to understand, what does that mean for your organization, right? The great work you do is wonderful, but at the other side of that is who are they committing to? Because that's what they're looking for, is the connection. And the third thing to know about this generation is that they are more interested in social awareness than they are advocacy. So when you think about that, 85% of millennials tie their commitment to a cause to a purchasing decision. And 61% of millennials feel personally responsible to make a difference in our world. The difference there is, though, they feel like grassroots awareness and grassroots advocacy is the better way to do it, to make faster progress, where their talents can be used as a young person versus waiting on the political system to run its course. So they're much more likely to engage in a grassroots campaign than they are into some kind of change of the political process. And philanthropy.com came out with a study in 2013 that said that 75% of millennials have actually donated to a cause in 2013, and 61% have donated their time. This is a generation that is ready. They just have to be asked. And we're going to talk a little bit about, in a little bit, what it looks like to engage this generation. And Abby's going to talk about how her organization has done that. How we ask looks a little different. And that's what we really want to make sure you guys walk away with today. So, Abby?
Thanks so much. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Compton. As was mentioned earlier, I'm excited to be back home in Greensboro for a couple days, back in my hometown. So, hello. As Stacey mentioned, I'm with the No Kid Hungry campaign, which is a campaign working nationally to end childhood hunger in America. So just a little bit about our organization, which is called Share Our Strength. Share Our Strength was founded about 30 years ago with a broader mission to alleviate hunger internationally. But today we're focused on ending childhood hunger here in America and ending it now. No Kid Hungry is doing that by surrounding children with access to nutritious meals through school breakfast, through summer meals and after-school meals, where they live, learn, and play, and also investing strategically in solutions that can help make it easier for kids to get the meals that they need to thrive. Today, we know that too many kids are missing out on school breakfast and summer meals, unfortunately. Out of 16 million kids that are food insecure in the US, that's 1 in 5 at risk of hunger. But the good news is that we're seeing the proportion of kids that are accessing school breakfast and summer meals increasing every year. We actually heard just a few weeks ago that these numbers have gone up to 22 million kids eating school lunch and 12 million eating school breakfast now, which is great news. We're on the right path. And just a little bit more about our approach. Our founder, Bill Shore, often says, the causes of poverty are complex, but feeding a child is simple. We have all of the tools right now that we need to solve this problem in the US. And so to do that, the No Kid Hungry campaign is employing a 3-pronged approach. First, we're working to expand access to the federal nutrition programs, school breakfast, school lunch, and also after-school meals and snacks. A lot of you all might be familiar with these programs from your work with schools. Additionally, we're working to provide education to families in need. Through our Cooking Matters nutrition education program, we're helping families learn how to cook healthy and nutritious meals at home, even while on a limited budget. And finally, we're spreading awareness of childhood hunger throughout the country. So we're working with national, state, and local levels of government and policymakers to help spread awareness about the issue in their communities. So I talk a little bit about the No Kid Hungry campaign just to give you some context for our work and our mission as an organization. But I don't have to tell you all, being a room full of early childhood development specialists and educators and advocates, how important child nutrition is for a child's long-term success. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over to the millennial generation here and what we're doing to really maximize this generation's impact on our cause. So as Stacey mentioned, we know that millennials are, first and foremost, more digitally connected than any generation that we've seen so far. The rapid pace of technological development over the last 5 years has just dramatically transformed the way this generation communicates with each other, both through social media and then just also in the workplace and with causes that they engage with. Next, we know that millennials are passionate advocates for change. But they're doing it in a little bit of a different way. They're doing it in much more of a grassroots-focused way than a purely political way, which is a little bit of a shift from prior generations. We know, because many of them are still living at home, that they are continuing to be influential voices in their households. And we know that just like with other generations, they're very varied in their personal and professional interests. And finally, this last category, last but not least, donors and fundraisers. You may not immediately think of millennials as having that capacity, but because this is a highly educated and highly skilled generation, we're seeing that they actually do have a really strong financial capacity, despite that student loan debt, to really contribute to causes as donors and also help connect other members of their generation with causes, sort of help bundling those donations for causes across their friend groups. So I wanted to, when I was thinking about this presentation, I wanted to do a little bit of research. And I came across this study from the Millennial Impact Project, which I think gives a great summary of some of the things to keep in mind if you're an organization seeking to work with millennials. And their recommendations are to really, start off by embracing some of these changing expectations, particularly around technology, as the new norm. This technology change isn't going away. The way that we change our communications by being more digitally focused is really going to be the standard set for generations to come. So it makes sense to embrace that change now. We also know that millennials like to feel and experience the cause at hand. As Stacey mentioned, they're really much more relationship focused than organizationally focused, and there's less loyalty. There's more loyalty to that specific relationship than to the organization. So I'll talk a little bit about how we've helped members of the generation feel and experience the No Kid Hungry campaign in a way that makes the campaign personal for them. Thirdly, we must foster this direct connection to the cause. Millennials, some of you all threw out at the beginning, millennials know what they want and they want it now. So instead of sort of offering a rigid way to engage millennials that is sort of most convenient for your work, it makes sense to take a step back and find different ways that you can really meet their interests where they are naturally. So being creative and developing different ways for millennials to engage with your program. And then finally, millennials are really, what we've seen with the No Kid Hungry campaign can really be a secret weapon in terms of helping spread awareness about our campaign and the way that we're seeking to change communities, college campuses, and really just help connect those grassroots leaders. Great. So, how many of these faces look familiar to you all? These are 3 actresses. We've got Sarah Michelle Gellar, Rachel Bilson, and Kristen Bell, who have been in a lot of young adult movies, popular TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. When we thought about engaging millennials in the No Kid Hungry campaign, we wanted to go to celebrity spokespersons that would really resonate with this generation. And so we went to their peers, basically. And what we found is that when we spoke with these women, they really were starting to identify more personally with the cause because they had all recently become moms themselves. So in having children, for the first time in their lives, they had really started to focus on their own child's health and development, especially in those early years. And that made them more aware of the challenges that other families who are less fortunate potentially face in those hardships. And so that was a great way for us to help open up this cause to a new generation, really building on that personal relationship that these women have with their own children, and helping engage millennials in the same way now that this generation is starting, the eldest in the generation 35, starting to really enter that childbearing period in a lot of cases. So drawing on that personal experience, really helping feel and experience the cause behind No Kid Hungry. And then second, we've really offered this sort of choose your own adventure approach to how we allow young people to engage with the No Kid Hungry campaign. So, whereas a typical nonprofit might sort of say, well, we'd love to have you volunteer with this cause, or, we've already got this sort of thing coming up. We've offered a variety of different ways that can really tailor to the interests of the individual. So, say for example, you love baking and your idea of a perfect evening at home is having a few of your friends come over and maybe have a glass of wine and bake some cookies, or maybe bring something into the office to share with your coworkers. We've created a whole campaign called Bake Sale for No Kid Hungry that lets young people host their own fundraisers to support the campaign and bake anything that they are already excited about baking, whether it's from a new cookbook or whatever they would like to do to that vein. But it's pulling in one of their existing interest areas. We've done the same thing with Taste of the Nation. Taste of the Nation is a series of fundraising events that we host nationwide. And we work with chefs who are leaders in their communities, who've opened innovative restaurants, trendy restaurants, really cutting edge culinary leaders in their communities to help raise awareness for childhood hunger. And you might ask, why do chefs care about childhood hunger? Why specifically? But if you think about it, this is a group of leaders who are small business leaders in their community. They're getting to know the city council members in their communities, some of the prominent figures in their community through their small business status, but they're also making their living providing people with food and seeking enjoyment from that experience. And so there's a natural connection that we found between engaging chefs on the culinary side and helping raise money for No Kid Hungry. And I think the great added benefit that we've seen there with Generation Y is to really play off of the success of popular shows like Top Chef and Chopped, where there's this competition across chefs and really engaging younger audiences in a way on those culinary skills. So Taste of the Nation, similar thing on the program side, our Cooking Matters nutrition education program. If you're a young person who wants to have a closer connection to our work and really step in alongside someone who's learning how to use cooking skills for the first time at home, this is a great program where you can volunteer. It's run in 33 different communities, including here in North Carolina, and you can really take a first-hand firsthand hands-on approach to helping further the cause of No Kid Hungry and working with a group in your community that's in need of a little bit of education around those food skills. So those are just a few of the ways that we've really helped to personalize the campaign and offer this generation more of a direct relationship with the work that we're doing. So one of the unexpected benefits, when we talk about millennials being a secret weapon, we've seen some unexpected benefits from our engagement of this generation in the No Kid Hungry campaign. We've seen great things, like this picture on the left where this is a college campus group that has really adopted spreading awareness of No Kid Hungry on their college campus. They've organized a club around this group. The idea is that once these people go off into the workforce, they'll continue to stay connected with the cause and continue to promote it wherever they go. We've also engaged this generation in some advocacy on Capitol Hill. Stacey mentioned that while this isn't a naturally politically active group, they do see the value of grassroots communication. And we've seen a value in it too when we take folks from communities who are sort of unexpected voices that you might not typically hear from in federal advocacy. We bring these college students over to the Hill. They've maybe volunteered with a summer meals program or a school breakfast program in their communities, and they can really offer a unique voice to that legislative debate for us. So that's been a great unexpected benefit that we've seen as a result of our engagement there. Lastly, I just want to sort of give a summary for how this has really transformed the country over the course of the years. Without this engagement from the generation, we wouldn't have been able to achieve the successes that we've achieved through the No Kid Hungry campaign, which has brought us to serve 345 million additional meals since the launch of the No Kid Hungry campaign. So just to review a little bit, we've seen that it really makes sense at this point with the rapidly changing technology to go ahead and embrace that as much as you can in your strategy, building out your social media activity, really developing new ways and methods of communication with this audience. And then we've also seen that making it personal, the connection of these celebrity moms to the No Kid Hungry campaign really coming about because of their own status as moms, really making it personal and tailoring that experience helps solidify engagement from this generation. And then we've seen just that offering choices, whether it's engaging through bake sale or a culinary event or directly working in a kitchen with a low-income family, gives people really a lot of freedom to apply their skills in a way that they feel fits best with the cause. And then finally, just being prepared to seize on these unanticipated opportunities. We didn't know that it was going to make a lot of sense when we started out to take college students to Capitol Hill. In a lot of ways, actually, it sounds kind of terrifying to a person from DC, but it's actually worked out in a really fabulous way, and it's been such a great way for members of this generation to feel like they're really making a difference themselves. And having that, having the open-mindedness to sort of seize on that opportunity when it arises can translate to unexpected benefits. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to move into a little bit of a question and answer session here with Abby and Stacey. Point of personal privilege, though, the New York Times Sunday magazine this week has one of the most important pieces I've seen on engaging millennials. So I really highly recommend you pick it up. It is going to be focused around, and it's actually online as well, it's focused around Black Lives Matter and the national movement against police brutality, and the way that it's really a leaderless movement led by two millennials who are using social media and other tools to really activate a national sort of outcry and a national campaign. So I really, really recommend you read it and either check it out online or pick it up physically. So, moderated question time. Mm-hmm. Abby, No Kid Hungry and yourself have had a lot of success engaging younger advocates. Why is it important to think through this type of engagement, both from a programmatic piece as well as from a donor engagement piece? Mm-hmm.
It's a great question. Thanks, Nation. Really, there are a few additional programmatic elements that came into play with us when we were looking at this generation that I didn't talk about as much in my presentation, but I think make sense in the context of this question. Over the last couple of years, we've partnered with Deloitte Research to study the long-term impacts on child development from food insecurity. And again, this is a topic that's probably very familiar to a lot of you all in the room. But what we found is that when kids are able to connect to school breakfast and summer meals and get these, have confidence that they're getting 3 meals a day, we see a lot of positive benefits on the school environment and academic environment. We see fewer absences and tardies. We see rising test scores. And over time, this translates to a lot of long-term educational achievement outcomes too. We see higher graduation rates and greater potential for lifetime earning. And so I mention this just in the context that, as we talk about ending childhood hunger, we're really talking about measures that have the potential to break the cycle of poverty over the long term. So it makes sense that we would look to engage each successive generation in this cause. We know that the cycle of poverty is contingent on the success of every upcoming generation, and having that generation, achieve higher educational rates, higher income rates, that is the key. And so, when we look at millennial engagement, I think this generation sees a lot of dots to connect there. They see that child hunger relates to a lot of bigger issues that concern them. They see that there's potential to positively impact poverty, not only in their community, but across the country. And I think that has a direct relationship with the power of fundraising as well, because when the generation sees that long-term impact and they see how broad the outcomes could be for their communities, they're really inspired to engage in the cause in a long-term way, but also in a way that fosters additional advocacy and sort of creates a snowball effect within their communities.
Excellent. Stacey, it might be said that millennials have a perception problem. There's a bit of a sense that maybe we do not engage in the causes that our parents engaged in, and one might argue it's because we engage differently, but how exactly are millennials engaging differently?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I get that question, people want to go immediately to the delivery tactics, right? What does it got to look like from a celebrity perspective? What does it need to look like from a social media perspective? And that's definitely a piece of how you engage the millennial generation, but you have to back up a minute. And you have to start with first understanding what engagement is actually all about. And it's relationships, and it's connections, and it's commitments to something that you believe in. And guess what? It doesn't matter if you're 22 or 82. Engagement is the same across all ages, right? It's the same thing like with persuasion. So I teach in the communications department at Queen's University in Charlotte, and every spring I teach a class on persuasion, and I teach them to sell whatever it is they're selling, a product, a story, an idea, commitment to a cause, through stories, because stories make connections, right? If they let me teach this class for the next 20 years and I've got Gen Z and whatever we call the generation after Gen Z, we're running out of the alphabet, so I'm not quite sure where we're going with the generation after Gen Z, which is my kids' generation, I'll be teaching the same stuff, because persuasion is selling through stories to get someone to make a connection. It's the same thing with engagement, right? It's that connection. So I have a question I wanted to ask you guys first. When you think about the folks who support your organizations and your entities, when you think about those folks, how many of you can tell me, by show of hands, how many of you guys can tell me specifically how many young professionals, how many millennials you have that are actively engaged in supporting your organization? How many of you know? It's like this percentage, right? How many of you know? Come on, raise them high. I can't see everybody. Raise them high. Okay, now keep your hands up. Okay, that's of a room of 250 people, right? That's maybe 6 hands. Keep them up. I know it's just like an exercise. I get it. I'm sorry. I'll go fast. Okay, so of you that have your hands up, thank you. Keep them up. Of you that have your hands up, how many of you know this answer? Because the answer is actually 0. I have 1 hand standing. Right? And that's our issue. If we want to understand how we're supposed to engage millennials, we've got to start with a conversation to the millennials that are in our backyard of what would engage you. There's a difference in how you engage a millennial who lives in the city versus one who spent their entire lives growing up on a farm and live in a rural environment and want to stay there, right? So we have to understand that we don't just look at this 80 million strong generation and say, that's how you engage. Well, no, right? Because a 35-year-old who is starting to have children will think differently about early childhood literacy and education than somebody who's 22, who's like, I'm just trying to pay off my student loan debt and I just need to get a job. Right? So you have to understand where they're coming from, and it starts first by asking the question. And not everybody's ever going to commit to an individual cause, right? If you ask me to give money to anything that involves pets, my answer is going to actually be no. I'm not a dog person. I used to have cats. I have no pets. Our fish just died, right? It would be not because I didn't feed it. It would be because my husband did not. I don't take responsibility for any animal in our household. Right? So I'm not committed to that cause. Do I think animal cruelty is horrible? Absolutely. But I'm going to give my money somewhere else because I'm engaged, because I have a connection differently with a different cause that really meets my needs. So first of all, we can't just assume that everybody commits the same way. And we can't assume they all commit to the same causes. You got to find the people that when you tell them your story, their eyes light up and they say, now that's something I can believe in. And not everybody feels that way, and that's okay. Now, when you think about engagement, right, when we understand what is it that gets you to engage and what does it look like to have you be engaged in our organization, then we can take that next step, right? Now, first of all, if you want millennials to engage, you've got to be more transparent than you've probably ever been before, right down to where every penny goes, right? This is a generation that really believes in transparency, and they should, because this is a generation that has seen companies implode because of crooked CEOs. And they have seen people's families and their financial security be wiped out because we're on the striving for the almighty dollar, right? And not looking at what the ripple effect of that's going to be downstream. So this is a generation that truly sees that happen, right? And it's the same thing with Generation X as well. But they also know that politicians lie and CEOs don't always tell the truth. And does anyone remember how to tell the truth anymore, right? So a transparency factor is really big. Once you figure out how someone will engage and why they want to engage, and you make a connection to a millennial, then you've got to be really prepared to be very transparent with them and let them understand what everything looks like. Then we can talk about how do we get them to engage from a delivery channel model, all right? So it is more likely that a millennial was much more likely to watch a video than read an email that you send, right? It just is. They would just rather watch a video on their phone walking down the street, right, than actually sit there and read an email. Do you have the capabilities to touch that generation of your supporters and donors that are millennials through text messaging, right, through social media? What does it look like? Then we figure out the delivery channel, right? So we think video, we think social media, we think text messaging, because they are connected to their technology in a way you and I just aren't. They are the true digital natives, right? I have a 6-year-old, that's my oldest, he's in 1st grade. And he is Gen Z, he's like the very tail end of Gen Z. I have a nephew who's 18, that's the beginning of Gen Z. And we call Gen Z millennials on steroids. So it's really important you understand the millennial generation because of what's coming after that. And we're also going to be around trying to get people to care, right, about our cause, and so that matters. But the very first thing my son wrote on his Christmas list for last year, the very first thing he wrote at school, so not prompted by anyone at home, they sat down at school and they wrote out their Christmas list. The very first thing on his list was an iPhone 6. Not a phone, not an iPhone, an iPhone 6. He's 6 years old. And he's not allowed to watch television during the week. He only gets it on the weekends. And then there's like 4 channels he's allowed to go back and forth between, right? But he knew the style, the number, the year. I don't know how they define that stuff. I'm not an iPhone person, which makes it even funnier because we're a Samsung family. Like, we don't do Apple, right? I'm like, not that I'm against Apple. I kind of am, but not really. But like, we're an Android family. Right? So the fact that he knew exactly the version, and I kept saying, why do you need a phone? He's like, I got to call my people. I'm like, you have people. Now, he's my very funny child, right? But, you know, so when you think about, he is connected to, he doesn't even have a phone, wants a phone, right? And is more connected to technology than I will ever be. I have a daughter who's 4, and when she was 3, she showed me how to turn an iPod off because I couldn't get it to stop playing music, right? And I'm convinced she just went over there and squeezed it till it stopped. But, she made it stop faster than I did. So pay attention with our millennial generation from a technology perspective, right? I talked about, this is one of the reasons why we're here today, is this changing technology. And it's only increasing, and it's only growing for the generations that follow. So getting it right with this generation is important. So make sure your website is responsive. Make sure your website can actually go mobile, right? Make sure that you can communicate with this generation how they want to be communicated with. But don't start there. Start by understanding what is it about what you do that would have somebody that is under the age of 35 actually connect to your generation and actually engage. Because as I reported earlier with the statistics, this is a generation ready to give of their time and their money. And they are personally responsible for making a difference in the world. Play on that, right? That's important. And those are the important things that we want to make sure that we make a connection to. And the other thing is the celebrity factor. Right? Not every organization can go out there and get Sarah Michelle Gellar to let me talk about, feeding kids, right? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't happen that way. But you need to understand that this is a generation where you can be a celebrity for absolutely no reason. It doesn't matter. You just got to be on television, right? You just got to have that camera crew following you around. Think Kardashians, right? And that's the reality. And so they see celebrity as their reality. Right? So how you engage them looks like that. It looks a little different. It doesn't mean you have to have a celebrity be a part of your campaign. But you do have to understand that this is a generation that definitely engages in that way. They engage technology from a different technology perspective, and they also look at their engagement, right? And you get their attention through a celebrity as reality type of engagement as well.
Excellent. Well, we are actually running a little ahead of time. And so if my friends and Heather don't mind, I was actually going to turn it over to the audience for a couple of questions. Is that fine? All right. Questions for any of us or all of us? Yes. Heather, is this okay? Awesome. Didn't want to get in trouble.
Patience just for a moment for a boomer.
Of course.
1946 to 1964 is the baby boomers. I'm 1950. That puts me at 65, folks. Just tell me, please, what are the birth years that define Generation X, Y, Z, Millennial?
Sure. So think that's, you know what, I probably should have started there. That would have been helpful. Thank you for asking that question. So 46 to 64 are our baby boomers. 65 to about 78 or 79 is Generation X. Now, it really depends on which researcher you're talking to, so you'll see a little difference in these numbers. And then about 1980 or 1981 to about 1995, 96 are our Millennials or Gen Y. And then we look at our Zs to be, and this is not firm yet, but we kind of look at them from about 1996 to about 2005 to 2010. So when I look at it from my kid's perspective, my son was born in 2008. I feel he's the tail end of Z. My daughter, who was born in 2010, I feel she's going to be whatever we name this next generation. But what you'll notice is that generations don't stop and start. January 1st doesn't begin in 1980, and everyone's like, and we're all different from this point forward, right? If you are the tail end of a generation, or you're the very beginning years of a generation, we refer to you as cuspers. And there's actually a little bit of research that says cuspers make the best managers because they can relate in a different way. So, for instance, I'm not going to tell you when I was born. I don't want to do that. I like you thinking I'm younger than I am. I'm actually an Xer, but I was at the tail end of X. I have some millennial tendencies, right? But I didn't get email till in college, right? So, and some things that are very much more like my Xer generation as well. So. It's not like we start and stop and January 1st a new generation takes over. It takes a couple of years for that to happen. And if you don't mind, let me just expand for a minute. We also study the generations in really only 2 ways. So when we sit down and we actually research the generations, we're only paying attention to really 2 things. And that's what happened to them in their formative years. And that's typically defined before they turn the age of 16. And you guys all know cognitive development theory, right? Basically, it talks about how you can understand and perceive things that happen to you in your younger years, which really begins to mold your perceptions of how the world works, and you take those perceptions with you into the world. So that's what happened to you in your formative years, and really the things that happened that formed a national dialogue, like 9/11, right? Like the Columbine school shooting. How many Xers do I have in the room? How many of you can tell me exactly where you were when the Challenger exploded? Because you were sitting in a classroom, right? For the most part, unless you were homesick that day, right? So there are marker events that define a generation as well, that inform a national dialogue, that informs what we think about the world. So we study a generation by what happened in their formative years, and then we study parenting styles. And that's really it. That's really what we look at. And then, of course, technology changes or actually have more to do with formative years than they do anything else. So it's really those two categories. It's getting harder and harder to study parenting styles. As a researcher, I will say I wish you guys would all just go back to like Dr. Sears or Spock or somebody, right? It makes it really easy. Everybody's listening to one book. Everyone's reading one baby book. But now there's a lot of different ways that we're parenting, which is reflective in the millennial generation as well.
Excellent. Other quick questions, quick answers? Anyone? We've answered literally every question. Yes, right here and then back in the room.
I was just figuring, with the parents that I'm doing home visitations with, a lot of it is that they want to be friends with their children and not so much a parent with their children. And I said, no, you can't be a friend, you're a parent. And that's why I think some of the attitudes are coming with the generations where, well, I don't know, my mom's my friend. No, it should be your mom's your mom, your dad's your dad,
Right.
because they have friends in the outside. But we have that generation. I don't know where, if as a researcher, you can tell me what generation created that.
Do you really want to know? Usually I always have a baby boomer who stands up in a presentation and says, why are they this way? And I'm like, I need to hand you a mirror. The reality of it is a lot of parents of millennials are baby boomers. Now think about how a baby boomer was parented by their parents, to be seen and not heard, right? And there are a couple of secrets regarding generations, and that's we don't want to be anything like the generation that came before us, and we want the generation that comes after us to want to be just like us, right? So think about how the boomers were parented. They didn't want to parent that way. This was also a generation that was large and had to work really hard and was a very wealthy generation. When you classify the haves, there's always have-nots, right, in every generation. So when you think about it in that way, this is a generation that had money, they had time, and they wanted to parent different than the be seen and not heard of how they were parented. So they're parenting in ways where they're friends. It's where the helicopter parent terminology comes from, right? Everybody understands what a helicopter parent is, right? A helicopter hovers. That's what a parent does. They hover, they fix everything, right? And then we also have the stealth fighter jet parents. I don't know if any of you guys know how a stealth fighter jet works, right? Now nobody wants to be called a helicopter parent. It used to be cool, and now it's like, no, that's not cool. Like, we're judging you when we call you a helicopter parent. So now there's stealth fighter jet parents, right? And if you think about a stealth fighter jet, it comes in under the cover of darkness, fixes its problem, and leaves, right? And that's what parents will do now. We fix things for our children, right? And so when you think about the boomers parenting millennials, the thing about it is I'm not seeing parenting styles shift away from that. I'm very hopeful the Generation X, who are in their 30s and 40s and early 50s, are parenting different as their kids get older, right? But we look at millennials starting to have babies, and they look a lot like us in terms of how they're parenting. And it's that push and pull between, but my mom is my friend. Now am I going to be the parent? Right, so my parents are older. I have baby boomer parents. My father is actually a traditionalist, right? With very much defined lines of who's in charge and who is not, right? And so I'm trying really hard to do that. And I watch my mom, who actually, when I see her with my kids, I'm like, that never would have flown when I was in your household. And she was like, yeah, I get to be the parent now. It's been exhausting being, I get to be the friend now. It's been the parent. It's been exhausting. That shift isn't happening the way. We're still parenting like friends, and that's what we're seeing in the research.
Excellent.
And I work with the teen programs too, and one of the things that in our research and questionnaires that we have with them, the question to parents
Excellent.
wanted to know what I was doing.
Yep.
So I was like, oh.
Thank you for sharing.
That's great.
No, that's great.
I mean, maybe we can direct some of the questions from research to actual engagement as well. I don't know if anyone has specific questions around engagement strategies or techniques or approaches that you wanted to explore a little bit. Tracy.
I think one of the challenges when you talk about the call and personalizing to, so people can relate to it in the storytelling that some of us may feel is that we're not doing necessarily direct service. We're doing more from an early childhood perspective, it may be more around policy or it may be supporting the system. And so trying to think about how to draw younger folks in that, you know, it's not actually directly touching children, right? It's impacting them, but not touching them.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I can relate to that a little bit because the No Kid Hungry campaign in many ways is structured similarly. And you know, we are a big national organization and that has its resources and benefits, but we also have the same challenges in that, you know, we are really conveners and collaborators more so than direct service providers. You know, I sit in an office on K Street in Washington, D.C. I don't, you know, interact with families that are in high need every day, and so I definitely appreciate that distinction. And I think the way that we've worked to overcome that is building partnerships with those organizations that share a similar goal, but do that direct service. So where they may not have, you know, communication staff or digital, you know, skills to be able to talk about their stories and their impact on the community as much as they would like to, we have the ability to partner with them and sort of amplify the work that they're doing and broadcast those successes, certainly giving credit where credit is due, of course, but also just helping to raise awareness for all of our work together as a team in a little bit more purposeful way. So it's been a little bit mutually beneficial, I think, when we've been able to have those successful collaborations. And I think that definitely translates to the local level as well with different organization sizes.
Excellent. One more question. Yes.
I believe that we can learn cultural competence on a broad level of arenas. And when you first asked us to talk about our initial impression of the generation, some of the things that some of us might have said probably landed with a pejorative sentiment. Can you give us some guidelines in addition to the engagement strategies? Are there things that those of us who are boomers need to understand from a cultural competence perspective that land on your ears as negative, pejorative, and discounting? Just tell us.
I'll add one thing onto that as one of the millennials. A conversation that was had at Aspen Ideas Fest last year was really around the concept of how it's not enough to say, oh, I'm open and accessible to all communities, that you have to actually go and personally invite them, and then when you invite them, you have to actually listen. I am, and I imagine that my friends up here are probably the same, I've so often found myself being like the token young person in the room. And so then it's like, oh, well, how do we engage youth? As if I'm some monolith, as if I'm like the single representation of youth at the table. And the fact is, if I'm the only young person at the table, we're probably not doing a very good job of engaging young people. And so a lot of it actually flows from invitation and then listen. And that's been the approach of every organization I've worked on, is that you have to ask questions and be okay with the answers being different and than what you expect. And you have to invite young people along on the journey so they don't reject the destination. And so those are sort of catchphrases, but they're absolute strategies as well. Anyways, Abby, Stacey?
Yeah, I would just agree with that completely. I think, the perspectives are different when you talk with different generations, the perspectives and skills also that they bring to either a problem that you're trying to solve or an issue that you're trying to promote. And so keeping an open mind in terms of receiving that, inviting that commentary and feedback, I think is always helpful. And the more you can, that's sort of the foundation of our organization. Share Our Strength is founded on the principle that everyone has an individual strength to share. And while that can be challenging in terms of teamwork and collaboration, it can also be a real asset to a team as well.
I think I would say that when we look at generations and we define them with negative stereotypes, it's typically because we haven't taken the time to figure out why they are the way that they are that way. So someone in the room said this generation, they want it and they want it now, right? And so we would think that they're a very impatient, entitled generation. But in reality, what they've known is that everything I actually need to know, I can get with the swipe of a phone or a computer. So it's not that they just decided one day to be impatient and to want everything right now and to kind of be like in brat status, right? It's actually because that's what they know. And I think it's really important that we unpack what we think about a generation, right, based on understanding, well, how did they get there? And at UNC Charlotte, I teach an 8-hour class on understanding the generations in terms of that perspective to HR professionals. And we have to go back in time, and we have to look at, they don't just become. They're not just here to annoy us, right? Like they become that way over because of what they experience. And we have to understand that so we can put things in context. And the other thing I find that a lot of generations do is that we stereotype an entire generation based on one anecdotal piece of evidence, some story. Our kid is this way, or that kid I worked with was that way, and then we label the entire generation. They are different. I'm different from my parents. You're probably different from your parents. Your kids are probably different from you. That's called the cycle of life. That's okay. A 20-year-old will think different today than they will think different when they're 40, right? They're a child, right? That's okay. But it's also understanding how do they get that way, and what am I missing? What am I not paying attention to understanding why they are the way they are, and then how do I approach from that perspective?
Mm-hmm. When I think of engagement, I think of kickball. I'm on a kickball team, and I spend all Sunday playing kickball, and you think it's a huge waste of time, except last Sunday we raised $13,000 in an afternoon for an anti-bullying program based entirely off of a calendar. And the whole thing was which 12 teams, the top 12 fundraising teams in the course of a day would have their own page on this calendar for the kickball league. It sounds super silly, but we raised $13,000 in an afternoon and for an anti-bullying program that had a $5,000 budget. So the point is, like, people engage in very different ways. And when Abby was talking about you want to feel and see and hear and experience, like, those are the pieces that you really have to nail. One final question, then we're going to move into a little bit of group work. Yes?
Okay, I understand that, but I just want to make sure. I'm a Gen Xer with a boomer Zoomer working with Z and Y, okay? I'm having a total miscommunication on boomer boss to communicate to the people that I'm trying to reach. How do we get that? Yeah.
Is your boss here?
That's why I stood up.
Okay, so let me repeat the question. She says that she has a boomer boss. She's an Xer with a boomer boss. And either is it other employees or who you're trying to reach, or is it Gen Y and Gen Z? Okay, so Gen Xer working for a boomer boss trying to reach an audience of Gen Y and Gen Z. And as you can imagine, it's probably not going well. Right. Is your boss here?
No. They're here, but not in this room.
Right. So it really, and you guys jump in it too. It really begins with an awareness factor and an understanding of what you don't know. And sometimes we have to bring things up so that they have a chance to learn about them, right? The hitting them over the head approach isn't going to work for your boss to understand what it looks like. He's got to have experienced it himself. He's got to be a part of these dialogues. You got to bring those people to the table to talk to him. And either he'll get it or maybe it's a she, but either your boss will get it or he or she won't. Right? But you have to bring them to where they need to go, which is understanding the audience they're talking to, and then maybe there's a ton of great generational books out there, maybe leaving one or two on his or her desk, right? That could be a little subtlety in that regard, because you just talking about it, I'm assuming you've done it, and it isn't working. So you've got to find a different tactic. And so maybe talking to some of his peers that already get this, and you can make that connection happen, taking them to your current audience, letting them hear, and then maybe just saying, we've got a generational issue. Let's do a book club or whatever, and let's read this book and talk about it. Mm-hmm. It really is either he or she's going to or they're not, and you can't impact either.
Abby, any?
Yeah, it just makes me think context. Like I think it's very easy for anyone in that sort of situation to just assume that you think the same things about the people that you're trying to reach, and you come to that assumption from the same place. And both of those are dramatically different depending on the generation that you're from. And so you might be trying to have this dialogue with other, your supervisor or other people from different generations about yet another generation. And there are just so many assumptions packed into that. So the more context and research I think you can do can only inform that type of project.
Yeah. I do a lot of digital media training for sort of executives and CEOs of nonprofits and heads of nonprofits, et cetera. And I often tell them, one of the best ways to change how you communicate is to hire a digital native, AKA a millennial usually, and then get out of their way. In other words, trust them. And if you don't trust them to communicate and to be a lead communicator for your organization, then you probably shouldn't trust your hiring process, because you should find the right people. So oftentimes we say, hire a digital native, hire someone who gets it, hire someone who knows how to engage, and then trust them to be a peer. Treat them as the equivalent of your communications director. Invite them to the table to make decisions about how you communicate and how you storytell, and get out of the way. But that's maybe too simple. So now is the time we turn to, yes, ma'am. Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to move into a little bit of group work. So you need to be in a group of 3, 4 or more. So invite people to join you. And we have 2 questions for you before you move. See, millennials can even kind of control a room. First question. So you leave this conference, you go back. What's the first thing that you would recommend to your organization or your board, if you're the head of the organization, to do to engage millennials in your work? If you had no limitations on strategic implementation or chain of command, what was the number one thing that you would do as a group? So come to some consensus. Second, and this is a much broader and vaguer question, but an important one. What great thing could the entire early childhood community do? What great thing could we accomplish if we truly engage millennials in our work moving forward? So you have 10 minutes to answer 2 very big questions. So go forth.
Thank you.
I think we know something.
Okay. Yes. All good.
Me? Yeah. Older than them.
When you said you had a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, I was like, what?
I'm 36. Yeah. I know. Thank you.
On both sides, my professional and my home.
Thank you so much. Are we still on?
So we found out that some of you were maybe texting and behaving like the millennials that you despise so much. Just kidding. So we're going to go back to the questions real quick. Number one, what's the first thing that if you went home to your organization, you had no limitations on strategic implementation, chain of command, or budget, what's the first thing you would recommend your organization do/change to engage millennials? That's very tactical. The second question is more sort of bold and amorphous and vague, but important. What great thing could all of us, the entire early childhood community, do if we actually did engage millennials successfully? Where could we go with millennial engagement moving forward? So you have about 5 more minutes to answer these questions. You have a 60-second warning. 60 seconds, 60 seconds. All right. You've now answered the questions, I'm confident. Some of you are still answering those questions. Some of these questions will never be answerable. Okay, so this is the part where you get to talk more. So we only have about 5 minutes for you to report out, so not every group will have that opportunity, but we're going to take volunteers. Any group feel like their answers are particularly compelling and want to share. Or not even particularly compelling, just want to share, whatever you want to do. Yes, please.
She's got an iPad. She's tech savvy.
Okay, so picking up on some points that you made, we thought it would be really critical to determine if we are currently reaching millennials. You asked that question, how many know? And I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I can't say I don't know. So determine if we are. And if we're not, then engage them by setting a goal of reaching X number through both messaging and recruiting on boards and committees. We're trying to cultivate young leaders, but not have that tokenism of just one, and testing our messaging with millennials before it goes out.
Great. Other groups?
We had a great conversation about the connection with the cultural competence, and how when you look at it through that lens as different cultures, then it's not about we have to fix this other generation or have them learn to do things our way. We've got to learn and understand them better and value their strengths and the way that they do things.
Excellent. Others? Tracy? It's always a danger to know the moderator. They can call on you.
So first, I have to apologize to you, Nation, because you were our token young person at our Blue Ribbon Committee.
It's fine. I was glad to be your token anytime.
And so that made me think when you were talking about you actually have to ask. I think what we would do is actually gather a group of millennials to start by just asking the question that tell us, because that's how we're looking to approach our work as an organization. So why wouldn't we do it for our outreach as well?
They would be so excited. I can safely tell you. You just have to ask, and people will be really glad and excited to join you in that journey. So does anyone have a great answer to what great thing we can accomplish together if we engage millennials? Yes, here we go. No pressure.
Okay, so I've really enjoyed this session because I have 3 children and they're all millennials. So I could really connect to this. And I got a great parenting tip. You know, my kids never read our long emails, so I'm thinking I'm going to start sending them video messages. Thank you very much. But just like with my children, I realized that where I am in my career, I want to embed my legacy in the next generation. All the work that we've done to build the initiative that we built, and we have built it, right? I want that to be carried on. And so the way to do that, we have got to connect with the millennials. And so that was my answer, that we can really influence the parenting of our millennials that will carry on our legacy.
Great.
Is that what I said?
That's wonderful.
Others? Yes. Hey, friend.
So I too, we really enjoyed our conversation, and it illuminated the hesitancy that we have in our office as boomers that are primarily the leadership in our office. So the big thing that we think is let's play to strengths. Millennials are completely comfortable with technology. We all know in our office that if anything breaks or we don't understand something, we all look at each other and go, somebody go find somebody under the age of 30, and they'll help us get this straight. So I believe that this generation could lead us to advancing expansion of access through technology. And I think that it's possible that we could have a campaign where we create an entrepreneurial spirit of expanding access, and it would empower us to use technology in a broader sense. I know that we're redoing our website, and we got really tripped up over how to increase access to applying for pre-K. And I kept thinking, if there was younger people in the circle, they would be going like, whoa, why don't you guys just, like loosen up about this and take some risk so that you can expand. And I think that could be a powerful voice in a circle, or more than one voice, as Nation was saying. But I just think that there could be sort of an HQ central in Raleigh as sort of an entrepreneurial center, but where millennials could lead us on how to expand access. And I also thought that that is tied to how they could find a voice in our system, and that I'm thinking about how we've been primarily text-driven. We use graphics and we use videos and pictures, but not enough, and we use too many words. And so I think that this conversation has made me think more about using more infographics and video, and I wonder about having young people do the interviewing of 4-year-olds to say, I'm going to work on the world. What do you want to do when you grow up so I can have it ready for you? Thank you.
Excellent.
That's fantastic.
Well, we are.
Can we get one more?
Yes, one more, sure. Yes.
I think that we can engage the millennials to really help change the political climate. They've already demonstrated that across the world that they can do that. But here in America, I attended the CCDBG session earlier this morning, and it talked about all these regulations are great and they're really going to improve the quality of child care. But after I listened to that session, I'm like, no, it's really not, because there's no money behind it. It's stronger regulations, but it's taking the same piece of pie and just dicing it into smaller pieces. It's not increasing the pie or adding more pies to the conversation. So what I thought of is with millennials, they are getting ready to be consumers, and some of them currently are consumers of early childhood. And so we need to engage them in the issue that they're actually facing, and they're going to reap the benefits or the repercussions of this new legislation that's coming down and the impetus that we're seeing from national conversations. And we're getting ready to have another national election, and advocates and lobbyists are saying they want early childhood to be a part of that national conversation. So millennials are going to be a strong voice in there, and if we would just ask them, what's your early childhood hashtag? And we were to get them around that, to rally around that, we could get more money to support the regulations that we do feel would be beneficial to quality child care.
Excellent, excellent. Well, closing thoughts from the panel. Our time is up. Abby, first, alphabetical order.
No, just thank everyone for their really thoughtful contributions and questions, and really love the energy and optimism that ended up coming out of our session after we broke through some of the stereotypes at the beginning. So thank you all for that.
and I'm the middle child. I will say that remember the statistic that more than any other generation, we want to be involved in our community and we want to lead. So if you equip people to engage and then also ultimately to lead, I think your work will be better for it.
You know, I travel all around the country speaking on the topic of the generations, and I have the same fear when I leave a presentation or I leave a workshop or I leave time that I've spent with people, is that it's going to die on the vine. And it's going to be this amazing workshop you just went through, and then you're going to go back, and guess what's going to happen? You got a life, and you got work, and you're going to get busy. And what we talked about will change your organization if you allow it. But you have to put some time and energy into it. And it takes effort, and you can't do it in one day. You probably can't do it in 1 year. But don't let today die on the vine. Use what you've learned today and really take it forward to make a difference and to make an impact.
Thank you.